gray hair or no hair.
Thank you, Chaplain, for that beautiful invitation. I would like to introduce our host, Director of Operations of the 45th Reconnaissance Squadron, David Hammershock.
Good afternoon, General Cohen, Colonel Petrick, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming today. We have assembled to remember a tragic day in Air Force reconnaissance history when America lost 6 airmen and Cobra Ball 664 25 years ago today. To memorialize this day, we are honored to welcome Colonel Paul Jeans, current STRATCOM ISR Division Chief, former commander of the 343rd Reconnaissance Squadron, and former Director of Operations of the 45th Reconnaissance Squadron. He is a master navigator and electronic warfare officer with over 3,400 hours. Welcome, Colonel Jeans.
Thank you, Dave, for that introduction. And I'd like to extend my welcome to all of you out here. You can see I'm going to be battling the patterns always. STRATCOM, so being able to hear the engine noise is kind of an enjoyment for me, so thanks for indulging me. I'd like to, again, welcome you. It's great to see a lot of the reconnaissance alumni attending, but it's also very glad to see a lot of the younger faces out there, and I must say you look very young compared to what I see in the mirror every day. I'd like to start by thanking the 45th Reconnaissance Squadron, and especially Captain Corey O'Toole for putting this ceremony together to recognize the 25th anniversary of the crash of Cobra Ball 664 and to honor its crews. It could have been real easy to let this day pass as just another ordinary day, just another day in the week. 25 years ago, our day started out fairly ordinary, but March 15th, 1981 turned out to be anything but ordinary. The mission on 15 March 1981 seemed simple enough. Take off, air refuel, do a nav leg on your way to the training area, and land at Shemya. I and West Thibodeau were part of the 2nd Cobra Ball crew that was being ferried out to Shemya on the tanker. After our routine air refueling with 664, our tanker with the 2nd Cobra Ball crew landed at Shemya, and we quickly settled into the alert posture at the rock. Later, as it had a habit of doing, the weather in the Aleutians went bad, and it went bad in a hurry. The winds picked up, began to gust, the temperatures dropped below freezing, and the snow came at you horizontally. It was a far cry from the fair, calm weather that the tanker landed in earlier in the day. The crews on 664 now faced an extremely tough challenge, landing at Shemya in the dark and in dangerous weather. After holding for weather and 2 missed approaches, Shemya Tower cleared 664 for the approach. All indications from weather said this landing would not be easy, and the crews of 664 knew it. During the approach, aircraft 664 sheared off its main landing gear on the pole supporting the approach lights to runway 10. Seconds later, at 21:35 bearing standard time, aircraft 664 impacted the runway and engines 3 and 4 burst into flames. The fuselage began to break up. The force of the impact not only broke up the fuselage, but dislodged seats and equipment inside. 664 skidded 2,000 feet. Then it left the hard surface of the runway, impaled itself on a large pile of railroad ties and timbers, spun 180 degrees, slid down an embankment. Cobra Ball 664, the pride of the 6th Strat Wing, was lost. In less than 12 seconds, 664 was transformed from a beautiful flying machine to a pile of twisted burning metal. Immediately upon hearing Tower Shemya announce they just crashed, the members of the 2nd Cobra Ball crew grabbed the crew bus and raced to the crash site. By now, the ball was engulfed in flames. On our arrival, aircraft 664's main fuel tanks blew, sending a wave of warm air through the bus and accentuating the already pungent smell of burning aviation fuel. We looked at the flaming wreckage, and many of us thought the chances of anyone surviving were slim. It was about that time that someone in a flight suit burst into the bus and fell onto the floor. We didn't recognize him right away, but the overbearing smell of aviation gas told us he was a survivor. The 2nd Cobra Ball crew struggled in knee-deep snow and dense smoke to pull an initial group of survivors to safety on the bus. After making several trips into the snowbanks and seeing no more survivors, the 2nd crew drove the survivors to a nearby hangar and began to administer basic first aid. While we were engaged in this rescue, survivors of 664, trapped on the other side of the runway, were performing heroic acts. Captain Bill Van Horn and Lieutenant Terry Crook survived the crash, but sustained injuries when the equipment console they operated collapsed on them. After freeing themselves, and despite their injuries, they stayed near the wreckage, braved the fire, the smoke, and the weather to free fellow crew members and pulled them to safety. Captain Van Horn stayed with the injured crew members, while Lieutenant Crooks went for help. Tech Sergeants David Gerke and Tommy Woods also survived the crash, unfortunately sustaining significant injuries. Between them, they suffered shock, broken ribs, fractured wrists, deep facial cuts, and 2nd and 3rd degree burns on their face. Despite their injuries and with total disregard for their own safety, they worked to get each other free from the wreckage and pulled a badly injured and burned Lieutenant Lauren Ginter from the wreckage to safety. Sadly, 5 crew members, Major Bill Bennett, Larry Mayfield, Master Sergeant Steve Kish, Staff Sergeant Stephen Balser, and Staff Sergeant Harry Parsons did not make it. Notwithstanding Tech Sergeants Woods and Gerke's heroic rescue efforts and the valiant medical efforts, Lieutenant Ginter became the 6th and final crew member to die in the crash. After several hours, we finally got the injured to the medical station, and a long night was finally and mercifully coming to an end. Some of the survivors sat and reflected on the crash, replaying each event. Others talked of families and changing priorities. Everyone remembered our friends who didn't make it. After spending 1.5 anxious days at Shemya, the crew of 6